Jim Moran, our collections manager and master printer, collections officer and master printer, has pulled out some really special treats from the collection. We're up in the library, so we have a new background. You've never seen this one before. We cannot show you all of it, so he pulled some treasures out to share with you. And this is the first time we've ever done anything like this, which is
true. It's true.
Pretty exciting. And if you guys like it, let us know because we can do it more. Let's see. The only other thing I do want to let you know is May 21st is next Friday, and we've decided that we're going to do a spring break. So we won't be having a Hamilton Hang next Friday, but we should have something exciting for May 28th, and then we've got something scheduled for the next upcoming weeks. So I'll be working on updating that. You'll get emails. But for May 21st, we will not see you. We're finally getting sunshine and warmth here in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, and we hope you are wherever you are. So that is my introduction. Jim, I'm handing it over to you.
All right. There we are. Okay. Yeah. So the Hamilton Library, we have to use the term incredibly loosely to begin with. And it's interesting because when I began at the museum in 2009, there was not so much a library as there were random file cases that had things in it, and some were specimen books, some were just mail that should have been thrown out. It was pretty random, and it took a while to understand my predecessor's filing system. I do recall opening a file that had a specimen book and shredded wheat, steel wool, and some random screws. And so I thought, well, okay, he's filing alphabetically at least. But anyway, today will be random because the library is still quite random. But if you look back into that room, you begin to see true library cases. And so we've got 4 dedicated rooms to it, which is quite a lot. And so there are various histories to keep track of. And one of those that probably has the most stuff would be Hamilton itself. When we look back to Hamilton in 1880, making mostly type, you also begin to very quickly see them branching off into other products. Reglet and furniture, cabinetry, and other products. The point, though, is that we can't afford to keep everything. And as they merge into dental cabinets, I know that everybody was hoping I'd show a dental cabinet catalog today. We won't. But anyway, it's trying to stay in touch with the Hamilton things and with the fact that the museum was founded by the Historical Society. You didn't have a company saying, let's protect our legacy here and we'll keep 1 copy of every specimen book. We've had to get them through various people. Many are missing. The first one that I'll show you today is from 1894, and it's a really oversized book. I would say that it is, well, I'll move over to it and that'll be more interesting. I can talk and show you the book as I do that. So, all right, are we ready? There we go. This specimen book is about 14 by 20 inches tall. And so it's an oversized book that indicated all of the stuff that you could get from them, of course, but the ornaments are massive. You know, I don't believe that this is actual size for a lot of this stuff, but it is beautifully printed, and it gives you the price. So really, you know, when you think about it, to a degree, it is actual size. So this is telling you right here at 30 lines, which I guess I've got picas on there. All right, it does measure out. Well, that's 28. Uh-oh. Anyway, $2 a pair for these. We're missing a couple of pages. This catalog came from Dave Pete, and it's got a lot of the earliest ornaments that they made. And so this sort of use would be for such large printing, right? Because if you want this in 30 line, you're going to be using some rather large type with it. But we'll just begin to flip through this a little bit. Um, some of you may know that people like Scott Moore have reproduced some of these. We do have these in the collection, but they're only 6 line, but I really do like them. It's a nice, elegant design, which was made on the die stamping machine. And so I think that they had one die for the corners and then dies for the other one, and then the center one. You basically could not compress that much wood in time, so, or in one shot. We're moving on to a really nice type, number 118, is the very elegant age. And as I said before, 1894 does mean that Hamilton has absorbed William Page at this point, but he had also absorbed Morganson Wilcox, Heber Wells, and Tubbs. So what we're looking at is really a combination of it. But generally speaking, when we look at specimen books, we're getting 3 characters, right? Or 4 characters, RENS, feeling that that would give you enough glyphs to give you the idea. So the fact that this is so large really gives you a nice sense of how the characters are used together. Number 228, I don't think we have any of that. It is very Halloweenish, I think. But it, the other thing about it, for those who have maybe not looked at too many specimen books, is that you weren't going to simply put what is the default in the computer? Lorem
Ipsum?
Lorem ipsum. None of that, right? Here is a letter that every progressive printer should possess himself of. They're going to write to you as the printer. Here we've got a variation here in terms of showing you newspaper type, having to do with the fact that on the evening of December 12th, the store of Martin Brothers was entered by burglars. The safe broken open and money and valuable papers stolen. That it was committed by Jimmy Crackham, I tend to think could be a made-up term, but anyway, it's such a nice example of the type in a much larger context than the specimen book does. So I think for that reason, it's quite nice. The number 62 here, which looks a lot like Etna to me, is quite nice. There's a lot of variations, really exquisite ornament in there as well. But
Jim, you're missing everybody's head turned to the side, which is pretty fun.
Oh, that's good. That's good. They're following along. We do have a little bit of the number 202. It has such interesting characters to it, including the S with that stroke across the top, which I find sort of curious. But the descending characters are pretty interesting as well. And what we do have is on a body of size that would fit it. So that part is great, because you don't need to do so much spacing in the process of it. You know, P-Dunk, I thought, who came up with that, right? Probably Solomon Grimshaw. But anyway, Podunk is the city that was the default one when you couldn't come up with the name for a town. But again, nice example of the type in use. The S has kind of an interesting curve to it. They're almost looking as though it's upside down, but we would never accuse them of messing up on that. Polawog Boulevard, sure. Anyway, a liberal reward will be paid by the grief-stricken father for the safe return of his hat and cane. So that's, I don't know, hopefully a happy ending.
Ooh.
Larger type. This 16320 line extended. We've always liked the interiors. I know on the number 15, it is Tuscan concave, is that correct?
Yep.
And just the interiors alone resemble ornaments in themselves. But now you see them beginning to go to characters that will give you as much of the glyphs as they hope you will need to buy the type. Number 120, I think, has a somewhat modern look to it because of the of that boldness and the just general shape of those characters, and then the nice elegance of the 203, where the thick and the thin strokes are really nicely counterbalanced. I believe that Hamilton may have produced this before Page, but Page had made this into a chromatic, and they even had a variation where rather than the sort of bump out, you had a point instead. This we do have in the collection. But one of the things that the largeness forces you to do is begin looking at certain areas on their own, as opposed to the fact that it's the letter M.
You can also, it's Tuscan Extended, and you can use it through the P22 partnership that we have done.
Excellent point. That's true. This is a nice extended as well.
I think that one is too.
So I'm not going to look through the whole thing because we don't have that much time. What I think is interesting is that they produced some in color as well. I don't know if it shows it on your end, but you can actually see the wood grain. So this type is end grain. And I find that rather interesting just because at, that would be about 50 line there's actually a faint line of the grain there. You know, you're not going to get a lot of type out of a half round at that size, but that's okay.
That's crazy. You can see the grain on there.
So more samples and more of that defaulting to the REN style for glyphs. No B-side. I don't know what that means. Now we're back to things that Page did, and this shaded styling does have what was often done as a stamping, but we don't have the second die stamp because some of these lines are just too fine for the pantograph operator, and therefore this sort of thing would have to be cut by hand. And so you may occasionally see variations, but there were also times where you would have a die. But in this case, you know, you're going to need it in different shapes depending on which part of the character it's being imprinted into. Okay, here we go, chromatic. It isn't shown in a chromatic, but when William Page did this, the ornamented area was a secondary color. And toward the end, Dave Arts, who was a Hamilton trimmer, said that they would put it on the die stamper, and you see that the approach, maybe not casual, but it isn't as ideal and as perfect as it could be. So now moving into streamers. Nice thing about brand new streamers is there are no lines there letting you see where the break is in these characters. Back to Clarendon's. I'll start moving a little more quickly. We'll move on to the next thing.
Okay. Ooh, dog. I just want that printed for my wall.
64 line.
That's great.
It's having a press and paper big enough to really do much, especially, you know, you start getting into this this fatter 72 line. This was also typically pattern size as well.
Yeah.
72 line is where Hamilton typically began their patterns. This one we have seen before.
Ooh.
And it's not a Gothic, but it looks goth. I guess that's one way of putting it. Those spikes are sort of leery, you know.
Well, and seeing just a type that has any kind of ornamentation or serif at this size is pretty striking.
Yeah, yeah. And so that is one condensed Grecian, the 288. So this is at 100 line. And, you know, we do have type of this size in the collection, but so rarely do you get to see specimen books with that in there. More of the 100 Gothic condensed. A little cross out here, they had made a typo, so this is actually 283, in case you're, you know, checking up on us at home or something. Now we've got this in a 6 line, but it looks a lot more dramatic in a 100 line piece. So thanks to Dave Pete for this. The idea of doing this in streamer style as well. The printing is quite good. There is just no line there. And, you know, they would have had the advantage of actually printing it without having cut it apart. So if they did that, I don't know about it. But 100 line catchwords probably have limited use other than billboards, but you never know. So while we are on the subject of billboards, Hamilton, as some people know, had bought the contents of a Cincinnati print shop called Enquirer in Cincinnati. And while they have lots of page type, I was looking through the, maybe I'll close this up so we don't harm anything. I was looking through the 1893 ledger of Hamilton, just entries at this point. But what I thought was quite curious is that under E, they do have a sale to Enquirer Job Printing Company of Cincinnati. So you do begin to see that connection between Hamilton type going to places. I was kind of hoping that I could find Hatch show print, because we have the other end of that, which is invoices that Hatch has saying that they bought blank wood for carving from Hamilton. So it'd be nice if we could sort of align that, but it's part of the collection. The ledgers and the journals were saved. Oddly enough, I think it's because they look nice on a wall as opposed to feeling that they had true value. And so they offered them to us, and I went over and I took them all. And then when they changed their mind, Stephanie and I took them back, and then they gave them to us again, and then they took them back. This is when they were liquidating the building. And fortunately, I think through the efforts of Tootsie Summers, we managed to finally get them. So, all right, we'll move on from this specimen book and bring out the next.
Sounds good.
I'm guessing no questions at this point.
No, just lots of excitement and some pieces that people liked, which I think there's some reproductions in that piece for walls. I think there were some spectacular one-page designs in there. I might have to bring that down a bit so it's easier to see.
We will. I'll begin with this one.
Okay.
This is Inland Printer, and we have at least 2 sets of them. And these are the bound volumes that would, in essence, contain your entire year. So this one from 1907 would have Hamilton advertising in it, but they were elegant. What's that?
And move you down just a bit.
Okay.
It'll help with exposure, and it'll help with with
they had great covers, and while this is not one of them, much of the early ones were designed by Will Bradley, and it's just beautiful artwork. But the printing is so impressive. It is what always, I think, kind of humbles me about the fact that they were doing such wonderful work, and we would consider the quality of their equipment probably a little less. So you can see Hamilton cabinets there that they're advertising. They were heavy advertisers in it, but there's also a really nice bit of information here, because so often people will come up with an older press and have no clue as to its origins, like this two revolution high-speed Cottrell. And it does give you both technical papers and just a lot of really nice information, but it's an amazing publication, and to have pretty much a full set is quite nice.
Somebody did ask questions, and I wants to know what print medium would that be, I think, for the books themselves.
Well, it was a variation. Here we have a lithography print, so they're doing 4-color here, and so the color plate and printing in this case was done by U.S. Color Type Company in Denver, Colorado. Now, these were sheets that would be sent out separately from the bulk of the book, and so pages like this were going to be done by Inland Printer. I might be able to find out. They were publishing this in Chicago, so that I think that's about as much as we can find out. So, various covers, Mealy Ponies. This, I believe, is quite similar to the one Hatch Showprint has. Just nice examples of places that will make tint and tint colors, but the advertising composition is quite good as well. And so it's always great to see a variety of machines that you may not find somewhere else. Brown Folding Company, really, as far as I know, was operational through the 70s at least. I think the one we have is a Bone, which is the other major folding company. The correspondents often asked for solutions to difficulties that printers were having, so that's kind of interesting. But the problem is you need to do a lot of reading to get your answers. So again, this becomes an advertisement for a company. These illustrations were produced with 3 printings, and it's an ad for the Electro Tint Engraving Company, and that was in Philadelphia. So the nice thing about the publication too is that you can have people not just advertise, but enhance the quality of the piece simply by what they're doing. Even the black and white ads tend to be really, really well printed. And of course, Lansing Monotype is not an unknown name for a number of people. So they would also have tipped in, or not tipped in, but added sheets like this one, because it's Warrenoko Paper Company in Massachusetts. But this is a couple of their sheets to give you a sense of the quality of their paper. So a lot of money spent on advertising when this was the only way to advertise, right? So I do have a copy of this that I may pull out, but like I said, this is the Inland Printer. This is an American publication. But at the same time, you did have the British printer. This is an 1898 copy of their publication, which is rather exquisite as well. You can see the sheet over the top as a protector, but these blocks were prepared by Anger and Goschel in Vienna. I'm probably butchering the name, but that's okay. It's a 4-color process print, but nice work in 1898. So British printer would be the equivalent of inland printer, and every bit as exquisite. You know, even I hope that you can see the varying tint of these of that design on the front. Again, a lot of information, letters to the editor, what's happening in Wednesfield, wherever that would happen to be. But anyway, they also had examples of engravings and how good the halftone by Arthur Cox illustrating in Hennet's Hill, Birmingham, could do images like this of these Italian mendicants. So, in case you were wondering about that. Excellent illustration of presses. There is a 4-color, also called the twin perfecting press, because working off of a roll, you could print both sides of the sheet. So I love the technical aspect of it because they're just great for ideas. It is interesting to see what was popular just in terms of type and design, but they've managed to get quite a few ornaments in on that one. The fashion book. Grafton Square, Piccadilly, in case anybody's wondering. John Tar Jr., no idea what that refers to other than some sailor. But anyway, there's some really elegant designs, and again, they're printed quite well. You know, these were 2 typefaces which were pretty common around that time. So I'll try to get the pinging out of the.
You're very popular right now, Jim.
Yeah, well, it may have something to do with coming from a large family. Once one starts, they all chime in. So anyway, a decent engraving, Barmouth from the island. So
I'm going to bring us down a little bit more so that way we can see this.
All right.
Here.
Okay, so we're done with British printing and inland printing, and we're going to move on to the American Encyclopedia of Printing. I have a somewhat newer variation on this, but again, pretty nice images. This is basically what the shop I grew up in looked like, you know.
You bring it down just a little bit.
Going on.
This way just a bit. There you go.
There we go. Okay, so this is 1871, and so the information contained is variant and long. It's as if they did need to write a novel about everything that they were going to tell you about. Combination of colors. But really nice illustrations. And so I think that is Caxton's illustration of the game of chess, something like that, with apparently birds flying off with body parts. Well, anyway, modern machinery, newspaper folding machine in this case, black leading machine, and a toggle press with a lifting head. So how do you go wrong? But, you know, rather extensive articles about the subject matter. There you've got Gutenberg at his press. There you can see a a copy holder and a type case, which is a little different than the variations that we tend to use. Interesting use of the imposition chase, right? So that you can have pagination within to lock that up and make booklet making rather quick.
Interesting question about what is a toggle press?
I would have to go back and look. I honestly don't know.
This is where we all need to spend Friday nights reading the books in the library.
I found the book. I just didn't read it all. That's my problem. This is the Mackie typesetting machine, which I am not going to get into as well, but it was an 1869 piece. You want me to move that a little?
Yeah, that's good.
That's better?
Mhm.
Okay. So I don't know the true workings of it, but you know, it had 14 keys, and so it worked with narrow strips of paper that were perforated, and so then those were put into the machine for the casting process. But no idea. It maybe did not work out so well because it didn't catch on as far as I know. The Minerva paper cutter, some rather simple objects like mitering and things like that. Anyway, I prefer a little bit newer copy of this book because, well, I tend to deal with things in at least the last century as opposed to the one before. So, all right, moving on.
Okay. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. Jim had fun picking pieces to share with you. And like I said, there are many, many pieces. So if you enjoy this, we can always find more later. Even I'm intrigued because I don't know what he's going to bring out.
So back to this idea that Hamilton at the end did not really respect their own history. This piece, which looks a lot like it was done in pencil or it was photographed and penciled over, was in the garbage. I found it in a dumpster near the end, but you know, you sadly have to then wonder what did they not save. But you know, it's very curious. It's quite casual. Those who have been at the museum may have seen this in the much larger reproduction we made, but you can tell a lot about the individuals just based on the type of clothing that they wore. And certainly in those days, everybody was wearing a hat, but it looks like they're just sort of getting ready, right? You know, somebody's got to tell this guy to straighten the H and get your hand out of there, buddy. Anyway, I note that there are 4 women that are working at the plant, which I just find curious because it's the sort of thing we wonder about. But you know, you see those who are more formally dressed and have nicer caps than the others, and you know, there is that division in essence. But a great thing to have uncovered and to show off, because the simple fact that it says Hollywood type is indicative of the fact that it would probably be prior to about 1888 or 1889, because as they absorbed other makers, the idea of veneer type or Hollywood type was falling away. I'll leave that there while I grab the next thing.
Sounds good. Yeah, we had fun. Jim mentioned it, making this bigger so we could share it and put it on display. We keep it safe and sound up in the archives, but that way we could make a big print of it and everyone could kind of see it and get a little bit more of that history.
Next thing up is a book by a guy named Cliff Harvey, not to be confused with our buddy Clint Harvey in Australia, but the book that he put together was based on what we refer to as the Graham Lee collection. And do you want to move that up?
Just one, yeah.
Sounds good.
Go.
There was I think a Philadelphia company called Bowen and Company, and they made paper bags and they printed a variety of things. But this gorgeous book was basically a 7-year effort of Cliff to record all of the engravings within the collection. And what's interesting to me is that I had certainly known of Hamilton, the type maker, but they actually did some engraving. This is not, but I'll give you a little bit better view of that.
Thanks.
There we go.
Nice.
But it's nicely printed by Cliff as well. You know, he's got a good sense of color. He used some really great papers, but the pieces in this collection are to some extent at Hamilton, and others are still at, I believe, West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia. For those who don't know, the idea of Before Rosebud Was a Sled is a reference to the Orson Welles Citizen Kane story. So just a historical bit of information there. Good from start to finish. The detailing on here is quite good, and what you probably won't see is the fact that when they finished these, they would print the serial number of the block into it. So maybe somewhere in there, depressed into it would be the color of the block. But this this great piece that I guess, let's see, engraver Joost Aman, but nicely repeated within there. So he just does a lot of great things with the images that he had, and you begin to see why it would take as long as it did to produce a book like this. And there's Rosebud.
Wow.
So we're looking at, I would guess, a 4-color piece. And this would have been a barrel label that came out of a collection. So attractive work for a barrel. This one is at Hamilton, the S. George Company. I think that they were the bag maker, and then a variety of smaller ones. So a lot of work that was done for Flower. I have reprinted this a couple of times. It's always interesting to me. I tend to immediately look at that little hairline there, which is now about a good 1/16 of an inch, and it throws my registration off. But anyway, a nice 3-color piece, and we use it to illustrate color separations and how that can work.
Marnie asked, what year was this again?
What year was his book?
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was in the 90s when this came out. That's a great question.
I saw 98 somewhere.
Yeah, I think you are correct.
So it looks like 1998, Marnie.
Yep. And so he's showing you things like the Hamilton stamp on a given character. So he's got a lot of information that extends beyond just the images itself. I love those crows. They just about blend into the corn. Maybe I'll bring that up to give you a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
Better sense of that. So there's quite a bit in this collection, and you know how we get, you want all of it, but I'm not capable of printing everything I've got. So while it would be fun to play around with that,
That's stunning.
yeah, nice work. Apparently the flower makers were willing to pay some money for their design. The next one here was one that Cliff had used. This, in essence, was a type of an ornament that you could purchase, and it's kind of funny. The shadow, I guess, of the shoe here makes it look like clown feet or something like that.
Well, I mean, it is a politician, so
Mm-hmm.
those colors.
Yeah, real interesting use of color.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you begin to see Cliff's skill as well in that use of overlays to the piece that follows it. But these, as simple flower labels, are beautiful. And at least here you get to see a nice breakdown of how the color works together, and then with the finished one at the bottom.
And this is Cliff Harvey before Rosebud was a sled, correct?
Right, and so Cliff was a design and printing instructor at Morgantown College in Morgantown, West Virginia. And he was a wonderful guy who had come to Hamilton certainly for the 10th anniversary in '09, and died just a few years ago. But he was a constant supporter and tried very hard to get the whole collection here. But, you know, I just appreciate his efforts. Again, nice example of the four colors used to produce the style. And then a slightly larger one. Now, I didn't always have this book, but I was aware that Hamilton had the Gramley type collection, and I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know who Gramley even was, if that was a person or not. And it's actually two people. And so, you know, like I was saying, the collection is somewhat random, but I'll show you how I learned about the history of this collection and book.
And I've put a link in the chat about some more reading you can do on the flour sack blocks. That way that might start to pique some of your interest on some more of the history.
Oh, yeah, good idea. So this takes us in a couple of directions, but we have just, oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. We've just moved up to August of 1988. UNLC was a great publication that I would occasionally run across, and it really had a lot of great information. It, to me, makes me think of an old Rolling Stone magazine, because they would use the newsprint style. But in terms of design, it was quite good. And so it was something of news in the world of print and type. I believe Ed Gottschall was the editor of that, but a woman named Ellen Shapiro was the artistic director. And these may seem a little old right now, but her styling was really wonderful. And so they would do a lot of different things. They would examine 1930s advertising pieces, and then move on to, okay, ITC's Arabic, right? So you were seeing a lot of really interesting approaches to them reaching out. And, you know, one of the things to remember is that I believe we're only 4 years into the Macintosh. So, um, you know, maybe Dan Radigan can find this in Letra or something like that for us. But it did let you know how this world was expanding quite a bit. And so it's nice, Roger Black contributing articles to it. And so I happened to be given this issue by somebody. Maybe it just came in the mail. I don't know. But I began to really enjoy it and look at, you know, the advertising winners and who was doing what. And then I typewriter italic. And then I come across this article about the Graham Lee collection, and I learned that the shop that had all of these blocks was closing, and a guy said, you know, I don't have the money, but you should buy this collection, to his brother-in-law. And so they went in on it instead. There might be a better beginning to that. And so one of them's name was Graham and the other one was Lee. So it became the Graham Lee collection. But there we go, New Treasures from Old Flour Sacks. So it talks about Cliff Harvey and his work in doing it, but it was a really great way to sort of circle back around with something I only knew a little bit about, because the museum had collections, but they didn't have the history of the collection. So now you're beginning to see reproductions of some of those things. And, you know, when you look at, for example, what people are doing with microbrew beer, you begin to see their, in some ways, echoing styles that were quite beautiful from the early part of the 20th century. And then we move on to other things. But UNLC was a great magazine, and it is a really, really nice one for getting a lot of different ideas. And then they begin to show you the entire ITC catalog. And as this thing got bigger and you were able to get it in different ways, you could order what you needed. They had ITC booklets, and at $1.50, how do you go wrong? You know? So, all right. UNLC, something to keep in mind.
Sounds good. And we're in our last 10 minutes, Jim.
All right. We'll go fast. Emigre, another great publication. This is now into the 90s, and the head of that figure is like the IBM Selectric type head for the very modern electric typewriter. But lots of type, and they are also focusing more on a more international audience. But it's just a variety of information which had a lot of great design in it. And so there's just interesting things to see by a variety of different artists. Stepping back a little bit to print magazine, which was very nicely done. J.J. Lank's engraving, he is pretty well known. This is spring of 42. So their quarterly also had technical information, and books, and there's a variety of pretty great contributors just in terms of composition and illustration, book covers. So print magazine is a bit harder to find. Daniel Berkeley Updike, who wrote some pretty impressive work on printing. I was unaware of him until I went to a conference where they were arguing the validity of his work. And it was sort of like saying the Bible was not really written by the right people. Anyway, moving back to 1916, Inland Printer covers, giving you an idea of how beautiful those cover art pieces were. It's pretty great stuff. And again, you know, page after page has great design and really wonderful work in it. So let's see.
There is one question.
Yes.
Do we know how many UNLCs we would have in the collection?
Sadly, it's a very small number. I think that we probably have no more than 10.
Okay. So we probably only have about 10, it looks like, in our collection.
So we'll end with postcards.
Woo.
Again, back to this idea that I'm finding things in the weirdest of places. These were tucked in a drawer, and this particular postcard is addressed to Messrs. Hamilton and Baker, Two Rivers, USA. That is from...
I'm going to bring our camera down a bit.
Oh, sure.
Sorry to interrupt. We're going down a bit.
This is March 17th of what, 1887. Dear sirs, kindly send your new wood type and specimen book to yours truly, A.E. Allen. I love the simple fact that it is from Olsonwood, Nova Scotia is enough to get there. P.S. Saw your card in Inland Printer. So that's kind of nice. A little bit nicer card here from Middleton, New York, to Hamilton and Baker, from Morgans and Wilcox. And unfortunately, they did not check off the cuts on the type that they got. And so they'd really like Hamilton to look over and make sure they got what they wanted to. But I had never seen a Morgans and Wilcox postcard before. So it's interesting that April of '87, they were looking at their type. And so it's just a great example. It's a Hamilton and Baker one to an individual that pretty much says their April 21st, 1887 order will need to add 2 more pages to the book, meaning the specimen book, I suppose. So it could have been their printer, meaning that the annual specimen is going to have to change. So the fact that these are Hamilton and Baker or Hamilton and Katz really put them early on in the history of Hamilton. It's, you know, amazing to me that the standard here, gents, send me a catalog, Hollywood faced type and what is that word? Anyway, that's from P.H. Bowen, the proprietor, and that's all you needed for an address. You know, if it was going to Ridgetown, Ontario, it was going to get there. So anyway, a variety of these, they would write on both sides. You didn't need to worry too much, apparently, about this stuff getting there. So that's about all we've got. We do have a letter to Gertrude Lohman, which had passed the censor, so you know that they weren't passing any wrong information. during the First World War. So the library continues.
That was amazing. Thank you, Jim.